slaves learn to read. Do you know why? Because if they read and they get knowledge, they know that they're slaves. If they don't know they're slaves, they don't have the knowledge of it, it's easy to keep them dependent. It's easy to keep them happy on the farm. William Shakespeare said, "Iron bars do not a prison make." And you'll see that in America today. You'll see people that are absolutely enslaved and dependent on the government. And because they have this idea that they have some autonomy in their freedom, they're okay with it. Think about this. I was just discussing this with my brother on the way here. Let's say we come up with a system of government where I say, okay, once a year we're going to flip a quarter. And what if that quarter comes up? That's how we're going to govern. So if it comes up heads, I get to decide how we govern. And if it comes up tails, then you guys get to decide how we govern. But because there's so many of you, what we're going to do is we're going to put it in law that it's just when it comes up tails that you guys get to decide. But I never show you the quarter, so I'm always flipping a two-headed quarter. What happens is it comes up heads and you go, geez, we didn't get it this time. But we got the hope of next year, right? And so you'll go along with whatever despotic law I come up with. Because you got this hope that next year it might come up tails. And I flip that two-headed quarter again and you go, well, you know, what bad luck. But maybe next year. Do you ever feel like we're living in that society right now?
So you're stuffing the ballot box.
It's whatever.
Two-headed coin.
Well, either stuffing the ballot box or, look, I've been saying for 10 years how despotic even the Hillsdale government is, in Hillsdale County. And people said I was a tinfoil hat wearing a kook and I didn't know what I was talking about. And now all of a sudden, in the crisis that we're in, it's starting to show and people are starting to see it. See, as long as they were blinded to the corruption in their own local government, they were fine with the despotic government that was beasting on them and keeping them dependent on the government. They were fine with it.
Do you have time to say something about Stephanie and Adams Township?
Oh, Lord, I would need an 8-hour dissertation on that. We just had court today on, I'm being sued personally by all of my elected officials, all of my county elected officials, because their feelings got hurt. I happen to be I was the parliamentarian for the Hillsdale County Republican Party. We took over the party in 2020. We went from having 15 to 20 people at party meetings to 150 people at party meetings. We actually did things. We got involved. We were in every one of the grassroots gubernatorial campaigns. We worked on every one of them. We worked on the grassroots state rep campaigns. We didn't take any prisoners and we didn't give any apologies. We were pretty bold in what we did. We've got shirts that say Hillsdale versus everybody. A lot of our government officials said, well, those are offensive. And when a lot of them were asked why for 2 years they haven't come to a party meeting, they said, because we didn't feel comfortable there. Because you didn't feel comfortable. How many people that run for an elected position think that if they're running under one party and they win, they're a representative for all the parties that are in that area and all the people that are in that area, thought that they were always going to have sunshine and rainbows and never hit a group of people that were contrary to them or hostile. Don't you think that that would be insane to think that? I would. So if you're going to raise your hand and you're going to be an elected official to represent people, but you get your feelings hurt real easy, I suggest don't run for that position because you're not qualified. If you can't stand on principle and face a hostile crowd, you're probably not the person for the job. So for 2 years, they didn't come to their own party meeting because they felt uncomfortable. Well, they're supposed to feel uncomfortable when they're doing bad things, right? We've got a state rep right now that our local Right to Life endorsed him. And then he took money, corporate money, to run to become our representative from Pfizer. Does anybody realize that Pfizer is the largest purchaser in the United States of aborted fetal tissue? Think about that. The Right to Life endorsed him, and he took money from Pfizer. How in this world can you ever justify that? And how can I ever believe Right to Life now? Right? Well, they've become like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton always running around for every controversy going, racism, racism. We've got to have an end to racism. But they create most of the racism that they're screaming about. Why? Because that's what gives them their platform and their money. So think about it. Why would they want an end to something that pays them? Well, Right to Life has become the same thing. NRA, sorry to say it, became the same thing. I just had 3 calls today. I'm a paid fundraiser from such and such for that. No, thank you. And they still keep hassling. No, thank you. I finally had to tell one of them, NRA has become Jesse Jackson. They couldn't get it through their head. Every time they've had opportunities to stop different things. Michigan. In Michigan, we had a constitutional carry bill that had passed, was in committee, and this last session before the new group come in, before we lose our Republican-held Senate and House for a Democrat-controlled House, Senate, and governorship, one of our grassroots representatives motioned to have that bill brought back out onto the floor and passed. And our Republican caucus shut it down. Shut it down, knowing that when the next session goes in, we've got a Democrat from Dearborn that is introducing a bill to ban all semi-automatic long rifles, regardless of what they look like. All semi-automatic rifles, all of them. Mini 14s, it doesn't matter what the configuration. If it's semi-automatic, it's illegal in Michigan. That's what they're going to try to pass. And they've got the House, the Senate, and the governorship. I'm sorry, but my representation failed me. It failed me. One of the things we're going to learn is you can't change Normandy until you change England, if you're an Englishman. You can't change Washington if you don't change your own township and county. If you're not going to change your township and county, you got no business trying to change Indianapolis or Washington, D.C., because it's not going to happen. It's insanity and it's a fool's game. It's the same thing. Look at your neighborhood. How are you going to change your neighbor if your house is a mess? How are you going to do it? You can't. That's even biblical. If you're going to change something, you need to look in the mirror and you need to change that person looking back at you first. Once that's done, then you need to take care of your home and your family and change it. Then you go to your neighbor's house. You don't go to your neighbor's house when your house is a mess. Get yours taken care of first. And you're going to find through these classes, Madison's very clear about that. And if we start paying attention to our local government, we can change the state and the national government. But we can't do it if we don't change our local government first. So that's the key. Any questions to the 1100s Charter of Liberty? I know there's a lot of words in there. In the packet, you're going to find there's a list of definitions. One of the things I would caution you at is if you find any words that you want meaning to, don't look it up in a modern dictionary, because it's not going to have the same definition. One of the things that we're going to get into in the Constitution is it says under the Commerce Clause. Everybody understand the Commerce Clause? It says that the government has the duty to regulate commerce among the several states. Regulate, back in the day of our founders, meant facilitate. So if you read that Commerce Clause with that original meaning, it means something completely different than it does today, doesn't it? So it says that Congress has an obligation to facilitate commerce among the several states. That means something different today, doesn't it? So you have to be very careful because words have meanings. Now, the other thing that we're going to get into is the Constitution is an ancient word for the word contract. It's a contract. Anybody here ever deal in contract law? Anybody here ever deal in contracts? Okay. A contract has to have at least two parties to the contract, right? And the contract has to produce something, right? That's the very basis of a contract. Two parties come together, agree on something, and that contract then produces something. And I go around and ask people all the time, okay, with the Constitution, it was a contract. Who was it a contract between? People always go, oh, the federal government and the states. Whew. Wow. Really? Because that contract produced three branches of federal government. There wasn't three branches of federal government prior to the contract. So the contract, the parties to the contract were the people of the several states. The product of the contract was three branches of federal government. That was the product. In contract law, anybody that has ever been in contract law or studied contract law, if there's a dispute over the contract, we have to go back to the original intent and meaning of every article of the contract. Even if that contract's 100 years old, we have to go back 100 years, read the papers and the arguments that created that contract, and that's how we're supposed to do contract law in the United States. And we do on every contract except for constitutional law for some reason. For some reason, we think that the Supreme Court gets to decide what is and isn't constitutional. Think about it. 1/3 of the product of the contract, we believe, gets to say what the provisions of the contract are. Nowhere in contract law is that true. Only the parties to the contract can dispute the articles of the contract. The product of the contract cannot. Think about that. That's just logic. But we've lost that kind of clear thinking. We've lost that kind of critical thought through the 20th century.
When did we lose that?
Started in 1913, but it's been a slow boiling of a frog. So we lost it through the 20th century. So
What was significant about 1913?
that's when the progressive ideology pushed its way into our contract. What happened was Woodrow Wilson, who happened to be the governor of New Jersey, and he was also the chancellor of Princeton University, he was the president of Princeton University, wrote papers, and we have to read those papers to understand his thought process and his intent. And when you read his papers, you're going to find out he ran as a Democrat, but he was actually a progressive, which is odd because Teddy Roosevelt created a party to run as a progressive and didn't win, and so he became a Republican, which is odd. So his ideology was, you know, we have three separate branches of government, and there's a separation between Article 1, which is the legislative branch, Article 2, which is the executive branch, and Article 3, which is the judicial branch, or the judiciary. And that's where our founding fathers seen that there needed to be a separation. They're separate but equal branches of government. Woodrow Wilson didn't like that idea. He thought what there needed to be was a separation between politics and administration. He believed, because he was a pile higher and deeper, that only smart people had enough thought process to govern properly. And so he thought that the president should be like an imperial leader. He should embody the will of the people. all of the people, not a electoral college, but all of the people in general. He should embody the will of the people. And then that will should be carried out by an administrative class unencumbered by the people. That's your alphabet soup agencies. Okay? Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 of the Constitution set up the very width and breadth of our government, which is right now 545 people. So tell me why 4.2 million people are clogging up all the highways to get into Arlington and Washington, D.C. every day to work. That's your alphabet soup agencies. Those aren't in the Constitution anywhere. Who puts those people? Who voted for the head of the FBI? Anybody? Who voted for the head of DOE or EPA or the FAA
CIA.
or the CIA? I mean, it's an alphabet soup of agencies. That is your professional rulers, the administrators that carry out the will. And who sets those heads? The president. So we've got Woodrow Wilson's ideology here that is contrary to our Constitution. So we have a president that we're now trying to get a national popular vote for that embodies the will of the people and then carries that out through a professional administrative class unencumbered by the people, people that aren't voted on by we the people, which is the government. These people we vote for are not the government. They are servants of we the people. We the people are the government. They just are placeholders in those three branches that we created with the contract. Go ahead.
Constitutionally, then, who would be the arbiter of what is constitutional?
We the people.
What would that look like?
That would look like grand juries and criminal juries. Did you get, are you a new student tonight?
Yeah.
Let me give you one of our textbooks. Our textbooks are very, very important because this will answer that question that you have. You want to take that back to me? These are citizens' rule books. No, the citizens' rule book, how many people understand that if you get charged with a crime, you have the choice between a bench trial or a jury trial? How many people know that?
Jury trial by jury.
Trial by jury, so you can have a trial by jury or you can have a bench trial, where the judge decides your guilt or innocence. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So in the 20th century, what we've got is we've got judges that tell the jury what they will find. If you find that A is true, then you must convict them of B. Anybody know that? We've got a voir dire process that first of all bastardizes and ruins the jury process altogether. And then you've got judges' instructions where the judge tells the jury what they will find. So if you're charged with a crime and you pick a jury trial and the judge tells the jury what they'll find, isn't it just a bench trial with an audience? Think about that. It's just a bench trial with an audience, because most people go, oh, he was convicted by people that weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. Notice it says duty. We have a duty. And one of those duties are, it doesn't matter what the legislature signs. We've got all kinds of unconstitutional law. People go, it's not unconstitutional, it never got to the Supreme Court. Do you realize the Supreme Court gets to pick and choose what goes before them? It's appeal by leave, not appeal by right. There's only certain cases that have appeal by right. Most all other cases are appeal by leave. So the Supreme Court gets it, looks at it, and goes, that's a political hot box, we're not touching that one. And then the legislature goes, see, it's constitutional, we can take your guns from you. Why? Just because the Supreme Court didn't take it? Okay, as a juror, I'm not just deciding the facts of the case. I sit in judgment of the law itself. Such as, in Michigan, we've got a thing called the Sex Offenders Registry. It was supposed to be so that we registered sexual predators, so that we knew where they were, so that we knew how to protect our children better. Right? The problem is that registry is now full of people Like one case, a gentleman was traveling down 94 at 2:30 in the morning and had to go to the bathroom real bad. And there was not a gas station close, and there wasn't a rest stop close. So he pulled off to the side and urinated on the side of the road. Now somebody that came by saw that, never saw any of his genitalia, but called the state police. And the state police came and did their investigation. He admitted to going to the bathroom. Well, the judge instructed the jury that if he admitted that, then they must find him guilty of indecent exposure, and he must be placed on the sex offenders registry, and he has to register for 25 years as a tier 2. Now that is not what that registry was intended to do.
Now, couldn't he have appealed that?
Yeah, appeal by leave.
Okay, what do you mean appeal by leave?
That means I go to the court and I say, I think they got it wrong. The court goes, yeah, we're not going to take it.
Oh,
That's appeal by leave. Do you have any extra evidence that wasn't brought out in the first trial? Well, then we're not going to take it.
why just, so he got.
He got put on the sex offenders registry. Now, a jury that understands their duty, knows that they're not just judging the facts of the case, but the law itself, and they're also judging on how that law was applied. Maybe it's a good law, but it was applied improperly. And so I can nullify, because even in a jury, we have to have a unanimous vote in a criminal trial. It's not a democracy with 51%. It has to be a unanimous vote. And all one person has to do to nullify that is go, not guilty. But he said he did it. Yep, I agree with that. And the law says that that's illegal. Yep, I agree with that. Then why are you saying not guilty? Because I think it's being applied wrong, and I'm going to say not guilty. And I'm standing my ground.
But there's no judge that's gonna tell the jury that they can nullify that.
No, they won't. But the thing is, I mean, let's look in California. You can kill your wife, you can kill her boyfriend, and you can escape in a Bronco, and if a jury says not guilty, not even a judge can do anything about it. The highest authority in the United States is a grand jury or a criminal jury. Why? Because that's one of the checks that we have on our legislature, which is the largest and most powerful branch of government. It goes back to the great body of the people. We, the people, are supposed to keep our government in check, our government actors in check. And that's one of the important ways to do that.
Now, John, in that urination case, I'll call it, had the sheriff stepped in, he could have changed that.
Yeah, the problem is, 94 is a state highway. And we got
So
this little agreement with the state police that, well, we'll let you guys collect all the revenue on the state highways.
So the local sheriff could not have changed it.
Yeah, he could have.
That's where it comes down to the importance of.
That's why your county sheriff is so important. And I'll tell you what, the people of Steuben County are blessed.
Yes, they are.
Absolutely blessed. So it's tough to find good constitutional sheriffs, but when you find one, man, you got to put everything you got behind them, get them elected. And then once they're elected, you got to hold their feet to the fire and keep them that way. Because even Madison, who drew the Constitution up when he became president, violated the Constitution. Think about that. That's one of the things we got to not do, is we can't deify our founding fathers. They were just human beings like us.
John, in that case, not just that case, but the Andy case,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
they got it wrong.
One of the reasons why I'm hated so bad in Hillsdale.
They're not gonna back up, they're just gonna keep going forward.
Yeah, because they get egg on their face. One of the reasons that made me such a hated person in Hillsdale is I started a group called the Hillsdale Justice Project back in 2010. I started it because I realized most people get caught up in the criminal justice system simply because they don't know what their rights are. Ron White, does anybody remember Ron White from the Blue Collar Comedy Tour?
Yeah.
Total drunk, but he's funny. One of the things he said, I knew I had the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, I just didn't possess the ability. All right? This is why you shouldn't be drunk, because you need to have your full faculties around you so that you possess the ability to remain silent. Now, there's times that you should talk to dispel the reasonable suspicion that a police officer has. But there's also times to shut up, because you're not supposed to argue the case there. You're supposed to argue it in court. So sometimes the best thing to do is just shut up. The state has an obligation to prove you guilty. You don't have an obligation to prove yourself innocent.
This would probably be a good time to explain not to talk there, because he might write down blue car,
Oh,
and you would
yeah.
say green car.
If we've got time, there's a video I'd love to share. It was by an ex-police officer and a criminal defense lawyer. And it really highlights, even when the FBI called me, questioned me, and he argued with me, why would you take the Fifth Amendment? And I said, because the Fifth Amendment was codified to the Constitution to defend the rights of the innocent, not the rights of the guilty, but the rights of the innocent. Because what's the Miranda warning? You have the right to remain silent. Say that again. What was that four-letter word?
You say can.
And will be. It doesn't say might be. It said it will be used against you. So even if you're completely innocent and you tell the whole truth, you've just destroyed your own defense. Because exculpatory evidence can't be used by the prosecutor for you. So keep your mouth shut.
Sometimes you just tater salad, John.
That's right. You call it the tater salad. That's another Ron White. Do you have an alias? Yeah, they call me the tater salad. Just call it the tater salad. So anyway, so it's important, and it's important to understand your rights. Now, getting back to when I started the Hillsdale Justice Project, I had a young gentleman that fought in Iraq for our country, was a decorated veteran, was in jail. He was out on work release working on my vehicle. And he was kind of, the gentleman that owned the business knew me, knew what I did. And he told Andy to come talk to me. Well, Andy had a hard time doing it because he was pretty embarrassed about it. So he came to me and he said, well, I'm on the sex offenders registry and I shouldn't be. Well, you know, I worked in prison for 8 years. Everybody's innocent. Everything I hear I take with a grain of salt. I want to see proof. I want to see facts. I want to see records. I want to see all that stuff. So he told me a story, and I said, would you sign over general power of attorney to me for everything so I can pull every file on you, your military record, everything? He said, yep. So he did. So I pulled his military file. I pulled everything. Now, one of the advantages is I was in the military, and as an NCO in the military, it was required of me to know what UCMJ was and what those regulations were. So I looked at his record, I pulled his DD-214. What had happened was when he was in Iraq in 2007, a younger enlisted person didn't like him. Isn't that odd how some people that are under your command don't like you? It's kind of expected in the military. So he went to his commander and said that Andy had child pornography on his computer. Because the DOJ and the DOD, Department of Defense and Department of Justice, overlap in that area, they gave him an Article 15, a field grade Article 15, which is 45-day restriction on post, 45-day extra duty, and I think it was $225 out of his pay, which is almost all you pay at that rank. Anyway, so he couldn't go out on combat trains. He couldn't do anything. He had to stay right there on that temporary post. They flew in an FBI agent from Quantico, from Fort Bellevue, came over, pulled all of his electronic devices, investigated him for 30 days, and went to the post commander and said, we can't charge him with anything. He doesn't have anything illegal on his computer. And they did a forensic check of his computer. So he wasn't guilty of anything. So under UCMJ, under Army Regulation 600.8.3, I'm sorry, not point, but dash, I get 600-8-3 of the UCMJ, down around G, it says that a post commander or a field grade commander can only pull an Article 15 in the interest of justice alone. So, if an Article 15, if somebody's charged with something that would be a felony outside of the military, the Department of Justice has to investigate. If they find him guilty, the commander can't pull that Article 15. That non-judicial punishment stays in their record. And if they get an Article 15, their date of rank, they're busted down in rank and they lose their date of rank. The other thing is they lose their time in service. And if you're in a combat zone when that happens, if you got any V devices, any Valor devices that go on any of your medals, those are stripped from you. Guess what